Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the extraordinary day of Tom Campbell. Thank you very much for being here. And I want to see who has come outside from Germany. Please, can you raise your hand up? Oh, so much people. A very special, heart warm welcome to you. Nice to have you here. My name is Evelyn and since 5 years I'm lieutenant of the Center of Informational Perception. I'm teaching with my partner Axel children and adults to see without their eyes. Has anyone of you heard about seeing without eyes before? Oh, so much. Wow, great. Fine. Okay. See without eyes means exactly what the name says. I think that everyone is able to see without his eyes. And we are teaching this. But maybe you think seeing without eyes, could this be? Yes, it could. We have so much people in our seminars who learned it, and not them, but 100 years before, a French famous writer wrote a book about seeing without eyes. And in this book, he told his experience about blind people who learned with him to see without their eyes. The speech is known as Louis Farigoulet as Jules Romain. But how the saying goes, a picture worth more than 1,000 words. And so I brought you here our superstars. Superstars, I mean children who learned with us to see without their eyes. Please welcome them. Okay, come here with us. Okay. Here are Sophia. There is Luan. Svea. Luan, Svea, Sophia, Lenny, and Julius. Is someone here in the audience who wants to check that everything is real with the out eyes? Someone here who wants to get up here? Yeah, you will come here? Okay. Okay, setz dir bitte die Brillen auf. Okay. Could you see that the mask sitting exactly? There's no possibility to take a look? Okay. Yes. Please check. Look at their eyes, please. All tight? Okay. Thank you so much. Can you do something with your hand for these children? Can you stand up, please? Okay. Schaut mal der Mann im Publikum. Great. Thank you. You want to get up? Yes? Can you do something with your hands? Please? Okay, schaut mal, der Mann da hinten im Publikum. Okay. Can you please stand up? Okay, who wants to show something more? Yes. Okay, and this man? Yeah. Okay. Someone else who wants to do something for the children, okay. Okay, yes, stand up, please. Okay. You see, it's possible to see with complete dark eyes, to see without eyes. But I have some super stuff for you too here. Here's Rainer. Rainer came to us before 3 years, and he is blind with only 1% vision. He has an operation before this 3 years, and he awoke because there has been an accident on his operation, and he woke up, and so he's only able to see 1% with his eyes. But he stayed with us, and so he's able to see much more. Please give him a welcome to Rainer.
Ich begrüße Sie auch recht herzlich hier in Stuttgart.
I welcome you to Stuttgart.
Mein Name ist Rainer, ich bin 62 Jahre alt.
My name is Rainer, I'm 62 years old.
Und wurde 2014 operiert.
I had an operation in 2014.
Und seitdem bin ich leider erblindet, habe noch einen Sehrest von etwa 1%.
And since then I'm almost blind, I've just 1% vision left.
Ich habe von Bekannten vom Sehen ohne Augen 2014 erfahren.
I have heard through friends about seeing without eyes.
Habe mich dann mit Evelyn in Verbindung gesetzt.
I get in contact with Evelyn.
Und habe mich dann Ende 2015 entschlossen, auch das Sehen ohne Augen anzugehen.
And end of 2015 I decided to approach the subject and start to learn it.
Im Dezember 2015 besuchte ich den ersten Kurs.
In December 2015 I visited the first course.
Es war phänomenal.
It was phenomenal.
Im Januar 2016 durften wir nochmals daran teilnehmen.
In January 2016 we had another course.
Und am 20. Januar 2016 erblickte ich das Licht der Welt.
And on January 20th, 2016, it was the first time I was able to actually see.
Es öffnete sich ein Fenster.
A window opened.
Und ich konnte zum ersten Mal wieder klar und deutlich, als ich mich umdrehte, das Gesicht meiner Frau erkennen.
So for the first time I could actually see the face of my wife for the first time at that time.
Und seitdem probiere ich immer weiter. Manchmal öffnet sich das Feld, dann geht es wieder zu.
So I keep trying. Sometimes this window opens for me, sometimes it doesn't.
Ich bin dabei, immer weiter zu üben.
I keep learning.
Hoffe, Entschuldigung.
Yeah, I keep learning.
Und hoffe, dass ich irgendwann stabil mit dem dritten Auge sehen kann.
And I hope that at some point I have stable vision with my third eye.
Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Yes, but what will bring see without eyes for us who are able to see? We have much people, they come to us and they told us they get more concentration in their life. They get more success because they learn to see without eyes. And they get more self-confidence. And these are only a few things that get better with see without eyes. Yeah. Now I will give to Tom Campbell, so please welcome him. Please welcome Tom Campbell here. Thank you, Mr. Campbell, for being here.
I don't need this. Hello, this mic on? Yes. Okay, we can. I don't want feedback going on here, so give it to you. Well, good morning. That was a little amazing demonstration, wasn't it? Of course, what's going on there is what we call remote viewing. But this is real-time remote viewing. Not just remote viewing a picture or a scene someplace, but getting that data out of the database in real time. The children are amazing. I saw the video that Oliver made of the little girl, and maybe one of those little girls was the one playing air hockey. And if you're familiar with air hockey, you know that that little puck floats on air on the table, and it moves very, very fast. It's a very quick game. And these children were playing air hockey. So it not only told me that it was real time, but it was precise. They were really getting a wide bandwidth signal in order to play air hockey. So after watching Oliver's video, Oliver and I made another video where I explained how it worked and what was going on and why sometimes the children were doing this when they were looking and so on. And all that has very good explanation. But then I was invited by Evelyn and Axel to come and attend one of their courses. And that's why Pamela and I are here. And since we were coming here anyway, well, we thought it would be a good opportunity to visit Oliver and his matrix visiting group yesterday and to talk with you today. So that's really what brought us here and why we're here. So this now is an event that is going to raise some money for the not-for-profit organization that I created to help fund the experiments. It's called CUSAC, which is Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. So that's what your ticket money is going to help fund. We did a Kickstarter program almost a year ago, raised enough money to do these experiments, and many of you probably are wondering what's going on with them. I have some good news, and that is that this summer, actually late spring, early summer, we're going to get some of those experiments done. We have a group at the university who are going to do the experiments, and they won't be able to do them all because we have reduced the I don't know if maybe, how many of you are not familiar with the experiments? Do I need to give a little background, or does everybody pretty much know what I'm talking about? Okay, a smattering don't really know what's going on here. I have come up with some quantum mechanics experiments, mostly variants on the double slit, that are experiments that have not been done before, or if they have, you can't find them in the literature. And they will do two things. If they work the way I think they will work, they will provide some very strong evidence as in physical, scientific experiment evidence that this is indeed an information-based reality, or in other words, a virtual reality. And also some evidence that consciousness is the computer of this virtual reality. So there is already evidence, starting with the double slit experiment, in the early 1920s, 1914, 1915, up to about 1925. In that decade, the double slit experiment was not only discovered or not only done, but was done many times, and it created a new science called quantum mechanics. And that's now almost 100 years ago that quantum mechanics was first initiated. And at that point, they knew that reality was not physical. Double slit experiment has an outcome that cannot be explained with a physical reality. It violates the materialism. It violates the understanding that this is a physical causality. But scientists kind of pushed that away because they didn't really know what to do with it. But now there's been lots of other experiments that have verified this. Not just double slit, but others. So the summation of all of these is pushing scientists to come to that conclusion that this indeed is a virtual reality. But two of the experiments that I have, and not two of them that's going to be done this summer, but the two that are not being done this summer are really rather dramatic in that they do some things that are so blatantly impossible if they work the way I expect. They do things that are so blatantly impossible to explain that I think they will add a pretty good push to the concept that we are living in an information-based reality. And that will just help speed up the process that has been going on for the last couple of decades of physicists understanding the nature of our reality as information-based. So I'm hoping to kind of push that ball just a little further and a little faster with these experiments. So we will get some results, and the experiments that are being done are ones that will demonstrate kind of a new concept in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics now explains the double slit experiment in a way that, to my thinking, has some flaws in it, and this experiment will show that. If that happens, then quantum mechanics will have to kind of be rewritten. We'll start over. So this is real foundational physics that we're talking about, things that are likely to change science. So that's the good news. We're going to have some done. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's not going to cost us very much. Actually, the money that we raised in Kickstart is going to be able to cover it and still have plenty left over to do the other experiments. That's why the limitation. We found a very, very simple way to do some of the experiments. And that's we're going to do those first. And then that should create enough interest to help us find people who will do the more complicated ones that take a lot more, well, they'll be more expensive, but they take a lot more expertise and some special equipment and that sort of thing to do. A little harder to execute. So that's it on the experiment front. I know a lot of people are interested. They're moving right along, and as information comes in, I'll pass it back out to you. As we get these experiments done, I'll be making videos and putting them out on YouTube and posting things, probably on the Kickstarter site as well, to let you know. And we may even be able to get a live camera in the lab so that everybody can just see it from beginning to end. We don't know that yet. It's obviously not our lab, it's a university lab someplace, and we don't know whether that will be allowed, but we're hoping that we can get live cam coverage so that as the experiments are being done, it can be a live feed. We will have a camera crew who are also going to be there that are going to do documentary of the experiments and them being done. So that's kind of my news and update. Now, the rest of today, up until 6 o'clock tonight, this is just going to be open for questions. And typically, I don't know, many of you I know have gone to my intensive seminars where I try to teach people how to experience and access the larger reality. And at the very end of that, the very last evening of the last day, we just do a Q&A. Let's let people ask whatever they want to ask, whether it's on the subject of experiencing a larger conscious system or not. And we always run out of time. We always could go much longer. And occasionally, when Pamela's not been there to take care of me and bring out the big hook and pull me off the stage because it's way past my bedtime and I need to get up and drive home the next day. I've stayed up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Basically, we stay up all night doing this Q&A, and there's still not enough time. So we're going to have all day just to do that. And there are no questions that are off the table. There's nothing that you should feel like you shouldn't talk about. Don't feel like you shouldn't ask a question that you think might be embarrassing or might be inappropriate. If it's an honest question, ask it. So nothing's off the table. If you want to say, Tom, why do you think this stuff could possibly be real? Sounds like nonsense to me. That's okay. Ask that question. Don't feel like that would be a rude question to ask. So if it's a real question, ask it. Nothing's off the table. So we can talk about anything that you want to talk about. We could talk about the science, the physics. We can talk about how you can see without eyes and exactly how that works and what's going on. We can talk about the My Big Toe model, nature of reality, personal things like fear, ego, beliefs, and how they affect your life, and what's the pathway to happiness and to joy in your life. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. So we will have mics here, 2 handheld mics that will work probably either side of the audience. And if you have a question, raise your hand, you'll get a mic. And actually 2 mics will be given out, one to the person who's going to answer first and the other to the person who's going to answer next. That way we can just keep going with the questions and it'll be a more efficient process. Don't start talking until you get the mic and know that the mic's turned on, because we're recording this. And this is likely to end up on my YouTube channel. And all of these questions that you ask, there's hundreds, if not tens of thousands of other people who would like to ask the same question. So don't be bashful. If you don't want to ask a question because you're shy, then write it down on a piece of paper and hand it here to Pamela. This is the one sitting here. And she will read it to me, and you will be anonymous if you want to do that. Okay. So that's just the plan for today. There really is no plan. We're just going to talk and answer your questions. That's what we're going to do all day today until 6. There's going to be a rather long, I think a 2-hour lunch break. So you'll be able to get up and walk around a little bit, get out of your chair, and take your time over the lunch break. So let us start. Are the 2 mics ready to be passed around? Do we have that? Okay, we have hand up here and here. We need a mic either place. Okay.
Hello, Tom.
Hi.
I asked you actually this one more time, the last time, and you never answered because I put many questions. So the question is, out of my experience, so the core of our being, we are actually some kind of vibration or something like almost like nothing, I would say. I mean, it's at least at what I experienced. So my question is, are we really kind of nothing? I mean, just pieces of nothing, multiple pieces of nothing? I mean, and the other question, so also out of my experience, there is this larger, so to say, consciousness or light or whatever, and then, and this one, made this universe or multi-universe or whatever it's called. So there are other alike consciousness that would make some other multiverses or something, or we cannot know or whatever. Thank you.
All right, let me work at that. I think there was 4 or 5 questions in there. First of all, the first was kind of, what are we? Vibration is just a metaphor. Okay? Vibration is a term that requires space. Vibration is something that goes back and forth. You can't go back and forth if there is no space. to go back and forth in. Vibration has to do with motion, and motion has to change location in space. And this is a computed reality. There is no space. It's a computation. Okay, that's what's meant by a virtual reality. So what are we? We are consciousness. Okay, so we are what I call individuated units of consciousness. And we are playing in this virtual reality game called our physical universe. And we are playing an avatar, a character in this physical universe, and that's what we are. All of us, our bodies, are an avatar in this virtual reality game. Just like if you were playing The Sims. If you play The Sims, you're the player, you're the consciousness, and you play an avatar in that software game called The Sims. And you make all the choices for your character, and your character executes those choices within that virtual reality according to the rule set that defines that virtual reality. We are the same here. So the player is the consciousness for the avatar, which is the thing that's actually doing. Okay, our bodies are the avatar. We are the player. We, consciousness, are the player. Notice that the avatar and the player cannot be in the same reality. The avatar, your Sims character, is in a different reality than you are the player of that character. So consciousness has to be in a reality that would appear non-physical from the viewpoint of the avatar. So we are consciousness, but our environment, our body, the building, the universe, is just information. When you play The Sims, you log on to the game, and when you log on to the game, the server, the computer that's hosting The Sims, sends you an information stream. Actually, it sends it to your computer. That information is in pixels. On your computer screen, that information is, say, 1.5 million pixels, 1.5 million dots of light, and each dot has an intensity, a color, and a location. So there's 3 pieces of information that goes with each dot. The computer sends you 1 million dots. They display on your computer screen, and you, the consciousness, you look at those 1 million dots, and you see your avatar, the house you live in, the refrigerator, the beer in the cupboard, your children, your pets, your home, your neighborhood, your job. All of those things are what you interpret out of those 1.5 million dots of light. So you get data from a computer, and you interpret that data to be the Sims game, the Sims virtual reality. It works the same here. So you are a consciousness, a player. You're getting a data stream. You interpret that data stream as this physical reality. So that's what we are. We are consciousness. We're not vibration. We are consciousness. So, awareness. I don't know if that answers your question or not. You've probably heard me say that before. Microphone still? Oh, it got taken away? Yeah, let her have it back.
So that would mean I experienced just, so to say, before. I didn't got out of this universe, so to say, of this physical universe, as experiencing me as vibration. So this is the conclusion. So if I were, so to say, would have experienced myself as consciousness, I would have known that, or...
Yeah, well, what you experience is your interpretation of the data you get. Okay? You receive information. You have to interpret that information, and whatever you interpret that information to be, that becomes your reality. That becomes your experience. Now, your interpretation has to be based on your previous experience, your knowledge, your fear, your understanding, your beliefs, your culture. All those things determine how you interpret the data you get. So if you interpreted yourself, what am I? And what you interpreted from the reply that you got was vibration, then that's your interpretation of the data you got. But that interpretation, like I say, is yours. It's a personal interpretation. It's not necessarily the way it is. It's just the way you perceive it, the way you interpret it. And in general, you should work with it how you interpret it. Your interpretation is your reality, and you have to work with that. So it's much better for you to work with that interpretation, whatever it is. You see yourself as light, you see yourself as vibration, you see yourself as soul, you see yourself as consciousness, then work with that interpretation. Work with that, with those metaphors. Your interpretations are really metaphorical, not literal.
So seeing myself as consciousness would be also an interpretation?
Yes.
Or is it not possible to actually perceive myself in a different way than interpreting myself?
No, all you can do is interpret, you see. You never actually get to see the source. All you get is data. You always just get information. You never can see or touch the source directly. You only get information and you interpret that information. Now that may seem like it's a sad story that you can't get to the source, but the source can only communicate with you by sending you information. The source can describe itself to you, and it may do that in terms that it thinks you can understand, that suit your metaphors. But there's no way to touch that source or interact with it other than by getting information. That's what it means to be an informational-based reality. So you never get to actually meet what's behind the data. That's why we have metaphors and descriptions of it. So when I talk about the larger consciousness system and individuated units of consciousness, don't take these literally, take these as metaphorically. These are metaphors. Because for us to have a conversation with each other, we have to kind of define terms, if you will. They're metaphors. They represent a function of consciousness. So when I talk about the larger conscious system, that then is a function of consciousness. That's the whole thing. That's everything. When I talk about an individuated unit of consciousness, that's that piece of consciousness of which we're a part. And then I break it down further into a free will awareness unit, which is just that piece of that individuated unit of consciousness that is kind of logged on to play this avatar. None of these things necessarily exist. They're all metaphorical to describe what we experience, to describe the functions of consciousness. Consciousness has to have some functionality. We generally know what that functionality is. What does it mean to be conscious? And as I develop this model, I get to a point where consciousness has this attribute. It has this function, this thing that it does. I make up a name for it. That way we can talk about it. If I don't make up a model or a name for it, then there's no way for us to communicate about it. So no, you don't get to see past that. Now, most of us, when we get that information, that becomes our reality, and we tend to think that that is exactly the way it is. We believe that that is the fundamental thing, but it's not. It's just our interpretation. And it's the same between individuals. When you and I speak to each other, I hear your words, I have to interpret them into what I think you mean. You hear my words, you have to interpret them into what you think I mean. You see, you never get to touch the real thing. You only get your interpretation. So when I talk to you, you don't ever get to connect with my mind, my source, You only get the information that you have to interpret. So we never really connect at that fundamental level. We only connect through changing information. That's why men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because they interpret data differently. They'll see the same thing, they'll hear the same words, and we'll have a different interpretation. So that's it's impossible to share an experience. You have an experience, but you can't share it. You can only describe it. And your description is not the experience. It's a shadow of that experience. Because you take that experience and you take something that is more or less emotional, okay, maybe some intellectual, but you take that and you have to put that into language. Language is information. And when you do that process, there's lots of room for error. You can't put that precisely, all the nuances, all the feelings. Your description of it is very rough. And you take that rough description in your language and you send it off to somebody else with the spoken word or written word. They get it, and then they interpret it in terms of their own experience. You see, it's almost amazing that people can even communicate with each other. There's so much room for error here, but nobody can really share an experience or share their reality with anybody else. All we can do is describe it. The description is maybe a 50% capture of what it is. You send it to them, and they maybe get 50% of that 50% that they interpret in some other way. And that's the way it is person to person. That's the way it is with the larger conscious system. It can't be any other way than that. Because the only place that you can experience is inside a virtual reality. Experience requires interaction. If there's no interaction, there's really no experience. So it requires interaction with something else, with someone else, or with some other thing. Even if it's with a rock, it's experience. It's interaction with something. Well, that interaction has to take place within a rule set that defines what the interaction is. The rock is hot, or the rock is cold. Well, you have to have a definition of what is hot and cold. What does that mean? You see, so you need a rule set that defines these interactions. So experience only happens through trading information when there is a set that defines what that information means. What is that context of that information? So that is how our reality, fundamentally works. We never do see the thing. We never even see each other. We only see bodies and get information, and then we do the best we can to interpret what we think they meant. And that's as good as it gets. So the larger consciousness system, it's a function of consciousness. There has to be an overall system, otherwise there couldn't be rule sets and virtual realities and other things. So because there has to be a system behind it, I call that the larger consciousness system. It's a metaphor for that thing that creates the order and the structure in which we interact. You see, metaphors, all metaphors, which is very unnerving to a lot of people because it like takes the realities, like you pull the rug right out from under their feet where they thought was solid is now just informational. But that is basically what quantum mechanics told us. That was what the double slit told us, is that it's all about information. If you have certain information in that experiment, the experiment comes out differently than if you don't have that information. It's not really a physical thing. You don't have particles. There are no particles, just like there are no waves. All there is information. And the double slit experiment showed that there was not a physical particle, there was a potential for a particle. And depending on how you set up the experiment and what you do and what you measure, that potential particle will manifest in different ways. So that's kind of the value of that experiment. It shows that you see a particle, Newton told us that a particle travels in a straight line unless it's acted on by a force. And in a double slit experiment, particles don't do that. They don't abide by that rule. They distribute themselves in patterns based on information. So that's the first time scientists really got a clue that this was not a physical reality. So that was a long answer to a short question. But it was really very basic, and I know there's some people who are very familiar with the work here, and there's some people who aren't, so I kind of stretched that out a bit to help everybody kind of get up to speed on what does it mean to be a virtual reality. Actually, it's a very hard concept to understand because we're so habituated to the concept of a physical material reality that we can't help it but just keep slipping right back into that viewpoint. It's very hard not to do that. All right, we had another question. Yep. Yes.
Should I stand up or? Okay. Test. Hello. Okay. So I got one question dependent on. I need to catch myself. Okay. I had one experience where I was really in a different state. Like it's a bit like out-of-body experience, I would say. But I was conscious of the physical matter reality, kind of. Like it was more things where it was like a tube, if you could imagine it. Like I had more situations right next to the other, but I was not in the scene. I was outside of the scene. I was watching the scene. That was one thing I can't really explain. And the other thing was I was also in a state of weirdness where I was not communicating through speech, but through emotion waves. Like it was just a package of meaning that was given to me, and I was, and I got it, and I was interpreting it like it was a bit fearful, and I was just I just had good feelings, and oh, it's fine, and I was sending it back, and it was transforming the whole thing I was interpreting. So yeah, those two experiences, I kind of can explain for myself, but I'm still unsure if that was like an out-of-body experience. And the last question maybe is, what was your biggest fear that you had to overcome in your life?
Okay. I'll deal with the first one first, while I think about the second one. Yeah, what you experienced is pretty typical. It's not that unusual. That's basically the way it is. When you get information, say from some information that is not defined in this physical reality, so we say that that's information from the non-physical. But remember, when we talk about the physical and the non-physical, there's really you know, they're not really different places, right? There is no, physical and non-physical are just relative words. When you're in this reality, we call it physical. When you're not in this reality, we call that non-physical. When you're in that dream reality, this reality is not physical. The dream reality seems to be physical. Whatever reality you happen to be in is the reality that you think is physical. And whatever reality you are not in, that reality seems to be non-physical. So this physical, non-physical is just relative to the observer. There is no fundamental reality that is more real than any other. You know, it's sort of like taking relativity and moving it up to the next level. Reality is only physical because that's your perception. That's the data that you're getting and how you're interpreting that and the rule set that's required to interpret it. So you can be getting some information here that you're in a chair, you know, you're sitting in this hall, and at the same time be getting information that doesn't have anything to do with this physical reality. There's not a problem parallel processing and getting two data streams at the same time, or getting data stream a little of this and a little of that, sequencing between them. That happens. So the idea that you were sort of here but sort of not here, and you were getting information, but the information wasn't so much literal as it was in feeling space. That's normal too, because trading information outside of this physical reality is more often not in language. You know, it's not in English or French or German or Spanish. It's in feeling. It's in feeling space. Intuition. It's in intuitive space. And you tend to interact telepathically, not literally. So it's not language is a very literal thing, right? We have strings of letters in the alphabet, and we string those symbols together, and strings of those symbols are other symbols that stand for things and processes and actions and verbs and nouns, and we put all that together, and that's our language. When you interact with someone telepathically, you get chunks of information, whole chunks. That's just the way telepathy works. You get chunks of information, and that information isn't necessarily it's not necessarily logical and linear like language is. It's often more in a feeling or an intuitive space. You just know. You just get it and you know what it means, and you know what the connection is, and you can communicate and send something back, and you can have pretty good conversations that way, and it's all telepathic. And it's not just between you and somebody in the non-physical that you use telepathy, but we interact telepathically with each other all the time. So we do that with other people. We just aren't aware of it intellectually, but at an intuitive level, we have these communications. So there's people we meet and we say, oh, you know, they have really good vibe from that person. Well, you've gotten a non-verbal, non-physical information that makes you like or dislike sometimes, or feel close to or estranged from other people, when there's no really rational reason that you should feel that way. That's all the communication that we're doing in a telepathic line, and we do that all the time. It's just another way we communicate, but it takes place in feeling space. So what you experienced is pretty typical of the way people interact. And yes, that brings up the question of, well, okay, you got this information, but is it real? Right? There's this big question. Is it real or did I make it up? There is nothing more real than information. This reality, this physical space we're in, is just information. When you dream, that's also information that you're processing. When you get things telepathically, that's information. When you use your imagination and imagine things, that's information. any information is as real as any other information. The way to look at it isn't which is more real. The way to look at it is which is more valuable, which is more useful. What can you do with it? How can you use it? Can you use the information that you get in a dream? Sure, dreams can be very, very useful. You can learn a lot in dreams. But that means that the dream reality is just as real as this reality. But the dream reality isn't as useful as this reality in some things. And sometimes it's more useful than this reality in other things, you see. So the question of is it real or is it my imagination is the wrong question. Is it useful? That's the right question. What can I do with it? How does it help me? How can I use it? So all information is real. And this information you get telepathically, which falls into your intuitive space and your feeling space, that's just as real. And you can say, but if I imagine it, it's not real because I just made it up. No, it's not the case. Your imagination can be a very powerful tool. Can you learn things and can your imagination be useful? You know, we're judging now just by how useful it is. Your imagination can be hugely useful. You get a lot of good information that way. Matter of fact, that's how you usually make assessments. See big pictures. It's how you understand things. You bring up models in your mind, your imagination. You kind of test these models against the data you have. You manipulate them, and then when you're done, you put it into language, and then you can communicate it to somebody else. But our imagination is a very fundamental tool that we couldn't do very well without it. That's our mental space. It's our mind space. It's where we do all our thinking. So when you get data, it can come from one of three sources. Your imagination is one source. Some other individuated unit of consciousness could be sending you information that's a source outside of you, and that could be a source. Now, they could be sending you the information verbally by talking to you, or telepathically by thinking about you. Doesn't matter, it could come from some other. Now, that other individuated unit of consciousness doesn't have to be physical. It could be something else in consciousness, not necessarily another human. It might be your dog. It might be something else. It might be your Uncle Fred that died last year. You know, it could be from any source. The third source is from the larger consciousness system itself. Now again, we're talking about metaphors, right? I say three sources, but all these sources are really just a different way of looking at a whole thing. They're not really, oh, you got this, you got that, and they're all different, they're all separate. It's not like that. They're all really part of a larger smear of information and data. So any of those sources can be useful. Some are more useful at some times, and others are more useful at other times. If you've ever had to give a speech and you're not used to standing up in front of a lot of people, the way you solve that problem is in your imagination. You give that speech over and over and over again in your mind. You stand up and talk to the wall. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, glad we're here today. And you say that to your wall, but you're imagining an audience sitting out there in front of you, and you go through your whole talk. And of course you stumble and you can't find the right words and you start over. But the 10th or 20th time you do that, it starts to pull together. And by the time you actually have to stand up in front of that audience, it's smooth and it flows because you've done it so many times. That imagination is very useful. Well, the point that I was going to make here is that you never know which one of those three sources is the source of your information, whether it's from the larger conscious system, from some other IUOC, individual unit of consciousness, or from yourself. Because your consciousness, you can create information. Consciousness creates information. sends and receives information. It's an information system. So you never know. Anything you get could be of those sources. Even when you're here, you get pieces from all three sometimes. You know, you have an accident happens on a street corner, and there are 5 people all standing on that street corner right where the accident happens, and you'll get 5 different accident reports of what happened. Not one. Everybody doesn't see the same thing. Everybody sees something different. Okay? Why is that? It's because we interpret information and because we fill in things with our imagination. If we only get bits and pieces, we tend to fill those in with what we are sure must have happened in between. And then that becomes real. So part of our reality comes out of our own self, comes out of our imagination. We create parts of our reality totally out of our imagination, and they're just as real as anything else. So you'll never know where it comes from. So the question, was that real? Was that really an out-of-body? Did I really get that information? It's the wrong question. The question is, was it useful? Now, when you ask the question, was it useful, you have to have a bigger picture of what useful means. Not necessarily, will it help me make more money, or will it, give me tastier lunch, or things like that. But you have to look at it as that not the information itself necessarily is literally useful, but perhaps just the process of getting it was useful. Just the interaction, just the fact that you were able to reach out in that state and interact with something else and know that you'd made a connection. Just the fact of making the connection and the processing you did to make that connection, that may be the usefulness of it, not the message itself. So when you say, is it useful, you have to have a bigger sense of what useful might be. So what you experience is what many people experience, and it's just the beginning. The more you do this sort of thing, the more you exercise that experience, the clearer it is as to what's going on and why it's going on. In the beginning, you just don't know. Everything's very confusing. You're not sure where'd that come from. What does it mean? And it tends to be very loose and undefined. But with practice, it gets more and more defined. With practice, you can become pretty confident that you know what source it came from, whether it was somebody else, the LCS, or it was your own creation. You become pretty confident that you can separate those things out. But there's no certainty ever. There's always uncertainty. And because there's always uncertainty, you must always remain skeptical of whatever it is you get. Don't take anything at face value. You should always be skeptical. And you might think, well, what's the value here? Find some value, but be skeptical, because that's just your interpretation of what the value is that you think is in there. You see? The person you have to be most skeptical of is yourself. That's usually the person you're least skeptical of, but it really needs to be the person you're most skeptical of. So you just get things and you say, well, that was interesting. I wonder what that meant. Maybe it was just the process, and okay. Then you go on. But after you've had maybe 1,000 of these, you can interpret it a lot better, with a lot less noise, and you get a sense of exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it, and it becomes part of a bigger picture. So it's not always just kind of random stuff that's hard to place. It gets better with time, but the time isn't short. This is something that gets better with time over decades, more than over hours. Okay, I'm going to have to pick up my pace here, aren't we?
The next question will be over there, but you didn't answer his second question.
Oh, Pamela. I thought I slipped out the back on that one. Okay, I have to think. Well, I was given a lot of fear tests when I first started exploring the larger conscious system. And you will, when you first start, you will get lots of things that will kind of, monsters that jump out from behind a bush and say boo to frighten you. These are just tests that the system will give you to see if you're ready to go on. Because the thing that is the most negative is fear. Fear is the problem. Fear is the difficulty. Fear is what gets in your way of being happy and finding joy and having good relationships and everything else. Fear is the source of all the negativity and dysfunction in your life. So it's good if you aren't frightened. And going into spaces where you create what's going on there. In other words, when you're in like an out of body, what you see is often what you create. If you're fearful, you'll create monsters and scary things. And then those scary things will scare you more, and now your fear level went up, not down, going in the wrong direction. You're de-evolving, you see. So the system doesn't want people to get to places that will frighten them because their fear manifests easily. So the system will often give you fear tests. And when I was just beginning my interaction with Bob Monroe at his lab, and I was just starting to get back into it. I'd started from a young child, like 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, and I was doing out of body then. I had entities come and help me out of body and show me around a little bit and give me some training. But then that all went away and was reawakened about the time I was mid-20s, mid to late 20s. And I just, after that kind of re-entry into it was when I started working with Robert Monroe. And I had an entity come, and basically it was a fear test. And they said, you go out on these out-of-body trips, you may not come back one day. You may just stay out there. And the body will just die and go away. And you won't be there anymore. You'll be in those other reality systems. Is that okay? So I thought about it. I said, well, let me think about that a while. And I did. I thought about it and said, do you really want to do this? It might be the end. I had a wife. I had a young child. I had responsibilities. Was this something that I was going to take that risk? And the entity was very serious about posing that as a possibility. And I thought about it for a while and came to the conclusion, yeah, I'm going anyway. I'm not that indispensable here. I'm going anyway. So after that, that thought just disappeared from my mind and it was no longer an issue. So that was a fear test that I was given just to see whether or not death was a scary thing for me. And it wasn't. So, that was probably one of the, most of the fear tests I get, I don't even have to go think about it. They're obvious right in the beginning. But that one I did think about because I had responsibilities, and I decided, if that's the way it works, that's the way it works. But of course, it doesn't really work that way. That was just made up to see whether or not I would have fear about not coming back. Because you see, if you have those kinds of fears, you'll manifest them. Bob Monroe, I don't know if you've read Bob Monroe's books, Journeys Out of Body, but if you did, Bob Monroe got into a jam once while he was out of body where he couldn't get back. There was this wall between him and where he had to go to get back. It was too high to get over. It was too long to go around. He couldn't go under it. He was just stuck and didn't know what to do. That was Bob Monroe's fear of not being able to get back. Bob Monroe stuck his hand into like a portal or a hole, and he put his hand in it, and he got a big hook through his hand. Painful, and he jerked his hand back. That was Bob Monroe's fear of the unknown, that if you stick yourself or a part of you into something that's totally unknown, there may be something there that bites you. See? So because he had those fears, latent fears, not in his intellect, but at a deeper level, that's why he had those experiences. So if you have fear, then you'll experience scary things. As far as other fears, I very quickly learned that there was really nothing to fear but fear. And that fear would cause you a lot of trouble, but if you didn't have fear, then you were perfectly safe. You would always wake up. You could always come back. There was no monster that was going to eat you or bite you or cause any trouble. There weren't roving bands of evil things that were going to get you. All of that was born out of your own fear and your own view of reality and how things have to work. If you have a belief that this world is a dangerous place and you're always going to have to struggle and fight your way through it, if that's your sense of reality, then when you get out of body, you will have to fight and struggle your way through it because that's your sense of reality. That's the kind of reality you will create there. Think of the out of body as you go from a multiplayer game here in this virtual reality to a single player game in some other reality, another virtual reality. Equally real, just different. That out of body reality doesn't have a tight rule set. You can teleport, you can do all sorts of things. You can change your shape and move around and lots of things because it doesn't have a very tight rule set like the dream reality, similar to the dream reality. But it's a single player game. It's you. Even though you run into lots of entities out there, it's still a single player game. Just like you can play a single player game here in a virtual reality, and there's lots of things there, but they're all what's called NPCs, non-player characters, characters that the computer is creating for you to interact with so that you can learn something. So all these realities exist for the same reason, and that is it's for you to interact and make choices in. In a dream reality, you get to make choices. This reality that we call physical universe, you get to make choices. Out of body reality, you get to make choices. And by those choices, you evolve or de-evolve the quality of your consciousness. You lower or raise your entropy of your consciousness. So they're all doing the same thing. But we need those different realities because you have a whole different set of choices in a dream reality than you do here. And the consequences are only temporary in a dream reality, whereas here the consequences go on and on and on. And they connect and interact with a lot of other people. Your consequences here turn into consequences for other people. In the dream reality, they're mostly just consequences for you. So it's a single player game. But the game is the similar reason, similar purpose for the game. Okay, next question.
Good morning. Hallo. Guten Morgen. Kann ich eine Übersetzung bekommen? Oder?
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry? Ja. Also meine Frage ist, ich arbeite zusammen mit Kindern und mit Jugendlichen.
Okay, my question is, I'm working together with children and youth.
So, und wie kann man Kinder aus deiner Sicht optimal in ihrer Entwicklung und ich sag mal, ja, in diesem Prozess unterstützen?
So how can you support children and youth in the best way in that process?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, children have some more capacity than we do. It depends on the age of the children as far as understanding these big pictures. When we watch these children here, we see they're young, and it turns out if they're like 5 years old, you can teach them to do that in an hour, in a couple of hours. If they're 10 years old, it's maybe a day or a couple of days. If they're 12 or 13, it's maybe 4, 5, 6 days. If they're adults like us, it's a week. We get slower and slower at understanding these things because we have beliefs. We believe we know how reality works, and when things happen that are contrary to that belief, we have trouble with it. We have trouble accepting it. That's why, it's teaching children to see without eyes is a much easier job than teaching adults to see without eyes, because we know that that's impossible. 5-year-olds don't. 5-year-olds live in a very magical place where anything's impossible. Magic happens all the time. So the fact that don't put on the mask and you can see, sure, why not? An adult says, no way, that's impossible. And that feeling of it being impossible is a block. They can't get through it because as anything starts to happen, they shut it down because it's out of, it's not in consonance with their belief system. So if the children are very young, then it's good to encourage that big picture thinking that they have, that openness that they have. It's easy to encourage them to kind of express and to be aware of that larger environment. They still have 1 foot in the non-physical and 1 foot in the physical. By the time they're 7 or 8, they're pretty much getting both feet into the physical. And now, if one of their friends says, oh, I can see without my eyes, they say, you're stupid. No, you can't. You see, and you start getting into that, and then pretty soon, peer pressure and adult pressure and whatever, they stop. They give up their non-physical friends. They give up their fantasies. They start becoming more realistic. When a kid's 4 or 5 years old, you notice they get presents for Christmas, and they can have as much fun playing with the box that the toy came in as with the toy itself, because they're so open to possibilities. Their mind is very flexible. But as you get older, that tends to go away, because if you mention it, you get teased. You get told that you're being ridiculous. And that then makes you reject it, because there's pain in that direction. But we talk about older children, and older children, basically need what all of us need, and that is they need respect of their ideas, their opinions. They need to be taken seriously, and they need to feel like they're part of something else, not just themselves. They need to be connected to something. Usually in the beginning, it's their family is the connection, but they need to have social integration and connection. Where we make our mistakes as parents and as counselors and people who deal with children is we see them often as people who don't yet understand and need to be told what to do. Well, when you tell somebody what to do, you diminish them a little bit. Unless, of course, they're very young children and you tell them don't play in the street. Well, little children won't pay much attention to you anyway. They'll go play in the street no matter what you tell them. So then you put a lock on the gate, on the fence, around, so they can't go play in the street. But as they get older, you need to give them options. You need to give them choices. You need to let them decide. You need to give them guidance but you don't need to tell them what to do. You give them guidance. If you do this thing, it could work out any one of these 5 ways. Okay, and you can explain the 5 ways. This one leads to a good time, and everybody has a happy time. If this way leads to problems, and this way leads to this, and you explain that, but then let them make the choice rather than saying, what you need to do is this way. Go out and do this and do that and do it that way. If you do that, they don't learn choice making. And then the older they get, the less experience they have making choices, the more they make poor choices, and the more they have poor judgment. So I'd say as far as working with older kids, older, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 16, whatever, you have to be careful not to take the shortcut, because you know the answer. You know what will be the best thing for them to do and the best way to do it. So you want to save them the trouble of getting it wrong. So you tell them, and you tend to be too strong in the way you order them about. So I'd say the most important thing is to treat them as little individuals that deserve our respect and understand that they have to make choices in order to grow. And let them make mistakes. If they make a bad choice, as long as it isn't going to hurt them, let them play it out. Then talk to them about it. Say, you had a couple of other choices there. It could have been different if you'd done it differently. But don't press it too hard. Children, particularly teenagers, will try very hard to give you the impression that they aren't listening to a word you say. They'll be staring at the ceiling or rolling their eyes or something else because they need that for their own self-respect, that they are individual people. They're not just somebody to be ordered around. But they do listen, and they do hear it. So you can just tell them and then walk off and let them deal with it. You don't have to get them to agree with you. That's forcing them to kind of see it your way. So the amount of rope you give them to make bad choices depends on them, of course. But that would be my comment on dealing with children. That's the thing we do the worst. So we want to save them from making the error, probably the errors that we made. That doesn't really save them. And it's so much easier to make mistakes when you're 6 years old. By the time you're 26, that same mistake has huge consequences. When you're 6, it all blows over and goes away in a few hours. When you're older, the older you get, the steeper the price is in making the same kinds of mistakes. Better to make those when you're young, and the price is cheap. Who has a mic?
Hello, Beatrice from Switzerland. I have an interesting question, I think. What about is the influence of neutrons on our consciousness? The particles from the sun?
Mm-hmm. What is the fact?
Neutrinos, you say.
Neutrinos.
Yeah.
Probably zero. Zero. One, neutrinos doesn't interact much. It just goes right through whatever it's around. You have to have something pretty dense and pretty thick before you get the slow neutrino down. They are not a very interactive particle. But secondly, there are no particles, right? That's just information. And your consciousness is not physical. So if we're into the belief that there is a physical particle and there is a physical consciousness that is created by a physical brain, then you have the problem of how does this physical particle affect that physical brain to modify that consciousness that the brain creates. But the brain doesn't create consciousness. It's a virtual brain, and it's a virtual particle, and there really isn't any connection there. It's now, I guess that brings up kind of the brain consciousness connection, which a lot of people will wonder about. The avatar has a body. The body contains the brain, and the brain runs the central nervous system. That's biology. That's part of the rule set that defines our virtual reality. The rule set is, how can I say, the rule set is what makes the body the way the body is. The body evolved according to this rule set. Okay, so the body sets the constraints of what can happen in this virtual reality. Or the rule set sets those constraints. The rules say what can happen. So the rules say that I cannot levitate here and bump my head on the ceiling. The rules say that if I raise my hand, it's because I have muscles here that pull on the bone. So those are the rules, and they set constraints. The rules say that I can't jump 20 feet in the air, whereas some other kind of critter may jump 10 times their own height. I can't. I can only jump a fraction of my own height. So those are the rules. So the actual biology as a representation of the rule set sets constraints on what the consciousness can do with that avatar. The consciousness can only have that avatar do what's allowed by the rule set that generated the avatar and that virtual reality. So if I, whatever, I do something to the body or something to the brain, so I get hit in the head with a club and it does brain damage. Okay, well, that doesn't damage the consciousness. The consciousness is the player. But it limits what the consciousness can do with this avatar now. So now this consciousness has to play an avatar that can't remember, slurs its words, and kind of staggers when it walks. And the consciousness has to play this character with those constraints, new constraints. Got hit on the head, now I've got new constraints that the consciousness has to work with. You see? So that's how kind of the body, the brain, and the consciousness interact. The body-brain just sets constraints. You also can do things to the body that lessen the constraints. Makes the consciousness able to do different things, okay, than it could do otherwise. So those constraints can be modified with physical things. So now you can take particles like X-rays, or say something that is very reactive because it has a charge, like protons or electrons, and you can take an electron generator and run those into the brain. That would really cause some havoc because the brain works a lot with electrical signals, and you put all those electrical things in there, you can probably mess the brain up pretty well doing things like that. You get too much radiation there, and you'd see effects just because those effects are computed by the rule set. And those effects might then change the constraints on what the consciousness could do with that avatar. So that's the consciousness, body, environment connections.
Hi Tom, nice to meet you. I've been reading your book, and after reading your book, a lot of questions just came up. But I tried to stay with 2 or 3 questions which were important for me. I'm just gonna ask one first. I think.
Yeah,
2.
one at a time is good.
Yeah,
Doesn't
one
tax
at a
an
time.
old man's memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one was actually when I was reading your book, and you was talking about that, the death and life experience. Because in the unit of consciousness, they die, they get a new life, and you say the concept was one of that they don't get too much information they can process, too much beliefs, they don't get into belief traps and that. And also about the siblings, all the people they met and everybody that was too much. And I was asking myself, what about entities in the non-physical, who were from the beginning, who don't have who don't live in the PMR, like in the physical realm of reality. What about them? Do they also have like a routine where they have to refresh their data that they don't get in belief traps, you know, because, I don't know, they live on forever. You know, like they've been around millions, billions of years, and I don't know, it's get kind of boring, I think.
Yeah, well, there are those entities who never experience a physical reality. Like you say, they've never logged on to those particular games. And their growth, their evolution of their consciousness tends to be slow. They don't grow up very quickly. It's a long, slow process. So if they work themselves into belief traps, they have to work themselves back out of them. You know, it's not they don't get a restart. So no, they don't have a situation where they then, you know, start over. If you're not, that death thing occurs in the virtual reality because that's part of the rule set with the biology. The biology eventually wears out. So you die, and it works very well because, as you say, people get trapped in their own beliefs. They get to where their growth slows down. The whole idea of this virtual reality is that it's a trainer for the evolution of consciousness. Right? Consciousness evolves here by making choices, and the choices here have a lot of consequences. You make a choice here, it affects other people, affects yourself, it's got consequences. A lot of the choices here are moral choices between right and wrong, being helpful and not being helpful, you know, being giving or taking. And when you're in the non-physical, that choice set is much more limited, and the consequences are much more limited. So the growth rate is much more limited as well. So the reason that we log on to this particular virtual reality is because this is the fast track for evolving. It's a fast track for making choices and learning from them. I know, you look at humanity and you say, that's the representation of the fast track? I know. So that's you know, kind of discouraging, right? I mean, these are the people who are growing up fast. But yes, it is. It is the fast track for all of that. You know, growing up is a difficult thing to do. Basically, growing up is changing yourself. Getting rid of that fear is not easy. It takes a long time. So the non-physical beings don't have a recycling process. You only get that in a virtual reality because that's part of the rule set here. That's what makes this virtual reality more effective than it would be otherwise. So could we all live to be, 500 years old? Well, that's possible, right? We can do a lot of things to affect biology here. But if we did that, and we could continue to learn and grow and add on to what we've learned and keep working like that all 500 years, that would be a good thing. If we couldn't, if we get to the first 100 and after that, we sit around and watch TV for the next 400 years, that wouldn't be a very good thing. If you so it depends on individuals. And I suspect if we squandered that time rather than made it into learning, the system would do something that would make that not work. There'd be other ways to maintain that life and death cycle that it just wouldn't work out that way.
Do that beings also get help, like to get out of the belief traps sometimes?
Not so much. They get some help. Sometimes they get, they are worked with and they get some help in their evolution, but not nearly as consistently as here. This virtual reality is the place where the people who are really interested in growing up come. They're here because this is the fast track. Well, not always. Sometimes they're just here because that's what they do. You know, it's what they've always done and whatever. But this, if you were going to be a tutor, let's say, and you were going to help kids, you probably wouldn't just go out on a street corner and put up a sign, "I help kids." You'd probably go to a school, right? And you'd set up shop in a school. And you'd probably have to get certification and all kinds of other things. And then you could tutor. You could help kids, say, learn math or something. Better to do that in a school environment than just kind of randomly out someplace. Because in a school environment, you have a bunch of kids who need to learn math. So they may be seeking out a tutor. So that's why the system is more likely to be helpful to you here than it would be if you were not here. This is the schoolhouse. This is the game here. It's a entropy reduction trainer for consciousness. That's the game we're playing. So we get help.